right, good evening. I'd like to call to order this joint meeting of the Norwich Public Utilities Board of Commissioners and Sewer Authority for Tuesday, September 26, 2023. In order to run the meeting effectively online for all those persons who are joining us by WebEx or by phone, I would ask you to mute your line when you're not speaking, and when you are speaking, to state your name for clarity of the record. All right, moving on to agenda item 2, we have a 15-minute public comment period. Are there any members of the public here this evening that would like to speak? All right, sir.
Hi, my name is George Plummer. I'm the owner of Norwich Beverage in the Industrial Park. I did receive the letter that NPU sent out about the rate increase, and I did have some concerns. So I thought I'd come to this meeting to understand a little bit better, your reasoning for reasons, and how that would impact my business. I was very impressed that Chris and Jeff both reached out to me immediately when I walked in, and I have to say that they put my concerns largely to rest. So I'd be very pleased to be able to be working with Jeff going forward to understand how the rate increase will impact me and how net I'll come out a little bit better than I would have before. Thank you. I want to thank both Chris and Jeff for doing that. Like I said, I was a little bit concerned about the rate increase and how that was going to impact me and what that would mean going forward for my business and the people who work for me. But they pretty quickly put my mind somewhat at ease anyway, so I do appreciate that.
Okay, thank you. You don't mind me asking, how many services do you use up there?
Water, gas, and electricity.
Okay, all right, great. Perfect. Are there any other members of the public who would like to speak tonight?
On the video.
Doesn't appear so. All right. If anyone else shows up later, we can always open up the public comment period. All right, moving on to agenda item 3, approval of the minutes for last meeting, which is August 29th. This is in your board package. Is there any questions or comments concerning the minutes in your board package? All right.
This is Bill Wazika. I had none.
Okay, thanks, Bill. All right, here none. I would accept a motion to accept the minutes. So thanks, Robert.
I'll second that, Stu. Bill Wazika.
All right, I have a first and a second. Is there any discussion on the motion? All right, hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Are there any abstentions? All right, the motion carries and the minutes are approved. All right, agenda item 4, we have 4 update and information packages that were in the board and the board material. We'll start out with the leadership team template. Are there any questions or comments on the leadership team template? I did not have that.
No.
I just wanted to touch base. I see the 2 subdivisions up off of Scotland Road, and I was wondering, is there a policy to go for new subdivisions to go underground with utilities, or is it whose decision is that?
So what we do, Bill, we work with the developer, but generally all these subdivisions do go underground once it's left the street. It's not a requirement, depending on what they're looking to do. But we work closely with them in the building department up front to put those together. And if you want more details, Mary Lou can follow up with you on exactly how those specific subdivisions are laid out.
Okay, good. That's good. Thank you, Jeff.
All right, thank you, William. All right, here we no other comments or questions. We'll move on to the strategic plan update.
Stu, I hate to do this. One other last question on the lab director. Any progress on that?
Great news, Bill. We appointed Stacy Stednicki, who has been a lab technician here at NPU, I think yesterday. And Stacy has over 21 years experience and brings a lot of technical expertise. She has a bachelor's in, I believe, biology. Am I correct?
I believe.
And she's going to be a great asset moving forward.
Good, great, good to hear that. Great. Now, there are no private commercial labs in the area that can provide, water testing. And we can't do that, right? Because of the funding from the state.
So here's what we're gonna do. We want to wait to do any investigations on this until after we had a formal approved lab director. And
Okay.
she's got a little bit, to make sure she's up to speed, but that's gonna be one of our strategic initiatives, is to look and see whether it makes sense or not to proceed,
Open it up.
pursue lab testing.
All right, good. Thank you, Chris, because I think it's much needed in the area, and it would be good. But that's good. You're going to look into it. Thank you. That's it, Stu.
All right, thank you.
Just as a quick addendum to that, I mean, I would think that if we're gonna do tests, doing it using an outside lab makes the most sense, because if somebody misses something, we wanna have, we wanna be free of any blame. We wanna use the outside professional as opposed to something internal.
So, we need quick and responsive testing, so we have an internal lab. They do water and sewer testing. And, there's certain things we do, subcontract.
Yeah.
Some of our more expensive and complicated tests. For instance, we've talked about PFAS recently.
Yeah.
And when you're measuring things in parts per trillion, the equipment and the expertise is at a higher level. And that's something that's done by very few labs, so we farm that out. There's certain things that we do that. What Bill is talking about is more, you have a well, and would we be willing to do a bacterial test and give a report if you're selling your home? That kind of work. So we got to look at the pros and cons, see if there's a value or a value in the community, and then bring it forward to the board if it makes sense.
Yeah, I just think the PFAS thing, for example, I mean, there are personal injury lawyers lining up to do something about that. And, if we do it internally and we miss something, and I'm not saying we would, but it happens, we're gonna be on the hook. If we hire a third-party lab, we're gonna have some that has good qualification, we're gonna have the defense.
But we also just got to make sure that we're, doing the right testing internal to make sure that our water quality and effluent going into the river is good every single day.
Yeah.
For these big tests like the PFAS, we're always going to outsource those.
Okay, all right. If there's no additional comments. We just got to the strategic plan update. So is there any questions or comments on the strategic plan update?
I think this is Bill Borzik. I think it's a good working document. I enjoyed reading through it to see what's going on. This time of year, at least when I was working, this is the time of the year to get your job performance appraisals in for, the workers. And I just want to make sure that the team is on top of that for this year.
We do that in the spring, Bill, and Michelle's on top of it.
All right, good. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill.
Yeah, I think the strategic plan was good as well too. I concur with Bill.
Okay, thanks, Sean. How long is this now been on?
I was 6:06, he joined.
Okay, so just make sure the minutes reflect that.
Yep,
Thanks.
got it.
Thanks. That's good. All right, if there's no other questions or comments on the strategic plan, we can move on to the financial update. Are there any questions and comments on that? I did not have it.
Neither did I, Bill.
Money's still there. Okay. All right, we'll move on to the 2024 board meeting schedule, which was provided. There'll be a vote on that later, but looks like normal fourth Tuesday of the month, correct?
Yeah, there's a few places where we didn't go that right because of NEPA, APPA meetings and certain holidays. So if you look at Thanksgiving, Christmas, it's early.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
And we also try to align, for instance, the finance audit subcommittee meetings to a little better timing so that they are more in line with when our budget's ready to be put together. Sometimes we had meetings that were a little before, we have to cancel, move. We tried to get them timed so that they fit before our board meeting and after we've got the budget prepared.
All right, then. Well, all that being said, let's move on then to the, agenda item 5, which is the Economic Development Subcommittee. Robert, would you like to say something about that?
Sure, we met,
Just two things about it. I mean, one thing before you start.
Yeah.
We also have this in executive session, so if there's anything that is confidential, we can move that, talk about that there. I think you can probably talk about 98% of it here.
yeah.
If there's anything you think is confidential.
Well, I mean, a lot of what we talked about in the meeting we had, was it last week or the week before?
2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago, was pretty zero. You know, we continue to look forward to a number of potential things, but they're down the road significantly. Probably the closest thing that we talked about was, CMEX potential installation of the battery units in Warwick and in the other, member communities as well. And I think they're talking about, 2 or 3 battery units here. Probably, it's not decided yet, but probably they would be privately developed with the PPA on the part of CMAC as opposed to done by CMAC alone, but that hasn't been decided yet. It has the potential to provide a little bit of power backup. I think they're talking about 4 operators on the world, but it's
They're trying to do is trying to.
And it also has the potential of being a significant generator tax revenue for the city, which is to do with that. I don't think there's anything else, first unless you.
And we're continuing to keep abreast of what's going on with Preston River Water. And we're still talking about probably early 25 before transfer of property.
Yeah, but that's one of the things I mentioned, that down.
Yeah, down the road.
I haven't put the numbers in the back. I haven't talked to anybody at CMAC about the size of the battery, but is it possible that they could replace the microgen fleet at some point with the battery?
If they were to say, we want to do another microgen, they would put a battery in it now instead of microgen. No carbon and does the same, it has the same end result and on par with financials.
Well, yeah, the diesel electricity is so expensive. I mean,
So what they're talking about right now is additional batteries beyond the microgen, not a replacement.
But if we had a failed unit, for instance, right now, the likelihood is they would replace that with battery. If there was a footprint.
okay. All right, thank you, Robert.
Yeah.
Thank you, and thank you, Chris. All right, so, that brings us to item 6, which is the rate presentation update. So Laura, are you gonna lead us off with that? Here we go. All right.
And actually, we have 2 presentations for it. And Brett and Terry will go into the PBA, PGA, hidden behind there. And you can come sit at the table when we talk about that. We're up front, wherever you're more comfortable. But Laura will kick it off with the rate presentation. That's so much better than a rate presentation.
You're gonna be waiting for great presentation.
Let's see here.
Okay.
Very good.
So we have a vote on the base rate increases on tonight's agenda.
Oh, yeah. If you'd like, to be able to see, if you want to slide over to one of the seats over here, you could do that. If that's more convenient. Might be hard to see it from there. That's good to see that.
Okay, good.
This is what it was.
So we have a board vote on the base rate increases on tonight's agenda. Clarify a couple of important points before we move forward regarding the economics. So we've discussed that the 2 major customer bills. First, base rates, which are subject to the public hearing process and recover labor expenses, costs, and other financial considerations. And second, adjustments to the PGA and the PTA and the use of the rate stabilization fund, which are not subject to the public hearing process and are managed by staff to recover energy costs and mitigate the impact of energy volatility. These 2 items are distinct and separate cost recovery mechanisms that are managed independently, and we're recommending that we combine the impact of both mechanisms to minimize the impact of the base rate increases on the customer bills. The subject of tonight's board vote is the base rate increases only, and if approved, we intend to apply the recommended PGA and PPA reductions as well. And then, as Chris indicated, after this presentation, Brenton will give a presentation on wholesale energy costs. Next slide. So in January of 2023, the cost of service and redesign project, industry leader Baker Tilly followed an RFP process, and the project was kicked off at the end of January. Working with the team from Baker Tilly over the next 5 months, the NQ team provided the required data and analysis using generally accepted cost of service study principles and industry standards to develop the cost of service study and the rate design. On June 29th, Baker Tilly presented an overview of the cost of service study and the rate design results, and on August 29th, the NQ team provided a detailed presentation on the rate design process, including responses to board inquiries. Tonight, in response to feedback from the board, we'll provide a detailed review of financial metrics and forecasted results based on various rate increases and rates of returns to address any remaining board questions. Next slide. Since the June 29th presentation by Baker Tilly, we've addressed nearly a dozen emails from board members. Board members have also met with Chris for further discussion, and there were several major focus areas addressed with this feedback, including the impact at different levels of rate of return, the impact of rate increases at a 0.25% lower than the cost of service rate design recommended rates, the management of wholesale energy volatility, including the PGA, the PPA, the CMEC Rate Stabilization Fund, and CMEC Trust Funds, and the impact to customer bills.
Can I just get clarification on something? Because we talked about rate setting, and we also talk about rate track. And I think, as I understand it, and I could be wrong about this, but as I understand it, we're setting rates for 1 year. And the track is a projection, but it's a projection that could change.
No, we'd be setting the rates for 3 years, Bob. And that's what's proposed in the rates that have been advertised.
Aside from sewers, 1 year, rate increase.
So for gas, electric, and water, it's a rate increase for the next 3 years. For sewer, it's just a 1 year change.
Okay.
So to recap, the cost of service and, next slide, please. The cost of service and rate design project objectives were to develop rates that were fair and equitable and meet full cost recovery and the key financial performance metrics, operating cash, operating income, and debt service coverage. Next slide. The cost of service analysis is based on high-level assumptions. It's based on normalized operations and maintenance expenses, which have been adjusted for inflation, normalized sales adjusted for anticipated lower growth, normalized weather, and our 10-year capital investment plan. In front of you, you do have copies of the information in the 10-year capital plan. Review comparison of the key financial performance indicators, the operating cash, the days cash on hand, debt service coverage, income, and then impact on the residential customer bills at the various levels of rate of return and base rate increases. Next slide. We'll start with the gas division. So the following slides are focused on the gas division, and going across the table. I was just trying to say a little, sorry.
It's a little bit.
There we go. There is a lot of information on these tables, so I'm going to go over what is included. So going across the table from left to right, and the tables include the base rate increase in the first column, the applied rate of return in the second column, and the forecasted results by fiscal year for fiscal year 24, 25, and 26 in the next three columns. The three rows on the table indicate a base rate increase of 0 or no change. The cost of service and rate design project recommended base rate increase of 4.5% for gas, and that's highlighted in green. And the board requested analysis of a 0.25% reduction to that recommended base rate increase, which is 4.25%. At the bottom of each table is the target for that metric. Any item highlighted in red is a forecasted result that does not meet the target metric. And this format continues for all of the tables in the gas division. So these first two tables are target operating income and the variance to that target. The two tables work together. The first table showing the target and the forecasted result, and the second table showing how much that forecasted result varies from the target. So if we look at that first table, the results for fiscal year 24 are all highlighted in red, showing that none of the forecasted income levels meet our target of $2,024,354. The target operating income in fiscal 25 is $2,091,270, and at the recommended base rate increase of 4.5%, the forecasted operating income is $2,114,686. And if we look at the second table, we can see that in fiscal 25, we are forecasted to exceed the target by a little over $20,000. And again, in 26, the recommended 4.5% base rate increase, we're also forecasted to meet the target. And at the board requested 0.25 reduction to the base rate increase, the target is not met until fiscal 26.
Well, what is the rate of return of that? What does that mean?
So that is the rate that's applied to the rate base. So that's that 5 to 8% that we talk about.
And she'll go into why 5% in a couple of slides.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what the consultant said was that the legal range is from 5 to 8%.
State Connecticut statute.
And
is
the
5 to
opposite
8%.
8%.
No, you'll see, we'll go into there will be differences in each of the business units, and you'll see why.
Okay.
Okay. So next slide. So for debt service coverage, again, the format is the same as the previous page, and the target is 1.7. And that target is met in all 3 years at the 4.5% recommended base rate increase. Next slide. So these two tables are operating cash and days cash on hand, again, working together. The target for operating cash is a minimum target, and the days cash on hand is a range of 180 to 240, which is the range for AA rating. So looking at the first table, the fiscal 24 results are all highlighted in red, showing that none of the forecasted operating cash levels meet the target. The target operating minimum cash is met in fiscal 24 and 25 at the recommended base rate increase of 4.5%. And in regards to days cash on hand, we see similar results there with fiscal 24, none of the results meeting our minimum target of 180. And fiscal 24 and 25, the forecasted days cash on hand meets the minimum and is trending positively.
So Laura, what is the target? I mean, what constitutes a target?
So the target is that calculation that brings us to that range where we're looking for our 180 to 240 days. Brenton, the calculation process for that target in the cost of service study, how is that developed?
That's derived by taking your projected expenses, right? I mean, in our expenses, they're basically like 2 buckets, right? We talk about energy cash flow, we talk about operating cash flow. There's 2 different buckets of cash. So what you'll do is you'll take the expenses relative to operating, right? So it doesn't include energy. Also, energy costs are grossed up for bad debt expense, right? Because we're not going to collect on every dollar we bill, right? Right? So that's would be the energy side. Operating is basically everything else, right? So it's all your operating expenses, less energy, less the bad debt expense on energy, right? We annualize that, and so divided by 365, that's how much cash you need per day times 180. That would calculate out to what your target operating cash would be to get to 180 days cash on annualized expenses.
So that's your minimum. And in looking at the AA rating, that minimum is that 180 to 240. So that's the range that we're looking at being in for, financial performance and a healthy financial position.
But we're already at north of 180 days, aren't we? In the current financial
So
setup. So what we're really talking about is the increment between
no,
our operating budget now and our operating budget in the future.
no, this is our cash position as forecasted in fiscal 24, 25, and 26. So if you look at where we are right now,
Yeah.
based on our analysis, with no rate change, we are not meeting our target in the gas division. We're at 152, less that 180. So clearly it needs a change. And this is what we're looking at what that change needs to be. Okay. So this table shows the average monthly residential customer bill impact at the 4.5%, which is the recommended base rate increase. The average residential customer bill would increase by $3.34 a month. And it's 20 cents less per month at the 4.25. So we would request that the board approve the rates at the recommended 4.5%. The 5% rate of return is recommended. This is based on the receipt of our $10 million PHMSA grant, which will allow us to invest in our infrastructure. This rate meets all of our financial metrics by year 2 of the rate track. It meets our debt coverage ratio in year 1, and it is commensurate with inflation. So before you next division, are there any other questions on the gas division, the recommended 4.5% base rate increase? Okay. So we'll see the same series of slides for the electric division, although there's some additional information in electric, so I'll go over that first table in detail. So again, going across from left to right, the base rate increase is the first column. The second column is the applied rate of return. And the forecasted results by fiscal 26 in the next 2 columns. The top 6 rows in the first table start with a base rate increase of 0% or no change. And then rate increases based on 6%, 6%, and 7% rate of return. And then there are 2 rows at the 8% rate of return. The 4.75% rate of return based on the cost of service study and rate design project, which is highlighted in green. And the board requested analysis of that 0.25 reduction, which is 4.5%. The bottom 4 rows on that first table are the target operating income at the rates of return of 5%, 6%, 7%, and 8%. And again, any of the items highlighted in red are results that do not meet the target. So on that first table, the target operating income, and the second table is the variance to that target. The first table shows that fiscal 24 and 25 are all highlighted in red, showing that none of the forecasted income levels are meeting the target. At the 8% rate of return, the target operating income in fiscal 26 is $3,117,363. At the recommended base rate increase of 4.75%, the forecasted operating income is $3,152,854. And if we look at that second table, we can see that the fiscal 26 forecasted results would exceed the target by a little over $35,000. At the board requested analysis of a 0.25 reduction, the target operating income is not met in any of the years.
All right, so I gotta ask that question I asked a while ago. And I've got to tell you, this is difficult for me to say, but beside that, it looks like for the 475 increase, the assumed rate of return is 8%.
Yes.
I thought I just brought that up.
So it was 5% in gas.
Okay.
We'll go in a couple of slides to the reason why it's going to be 8% here.
Okay. And at 4.25%, what is the rate of return, the forecasted rate of return?
I'm sorry, at which?
At 4.25%, excuse me, 4.5%.
So 4.5%, it would still be using that same target of that 8% because the 4.5% is at that 8% rate of return. So the bottom 2 lines are on the top part of the table are 8%. So you look at the target across the bottom at 8%.
Okay.
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 So in looking at that, at year 1 in fiscal 24, the forecasted result at 4.5% of the base rate increase is $1,114,296, and the target is 2.9 million. So it's a significant variance of 1.5 million. And then going across, you would see that same ratio. So year two, it's a variance of over 800,000, year three, 150,000. Okay,
Yeah, good. No, you go ahead.
okay, so we'll move forward. So looking at debt service coverage, again, same formatting. The target is the 1.7, and it's met in all 3 years at the recommended 4.75 base rate increase. And again, focusing on operating cash and days cash on hand. The operating cash is the minimum target, and the days cash on hand has that range of 180 to 240, which is that double A rating. Looking at the first table, the results at 5, 6, and 7% rate of return show significantly decreasing cash balances from about $1 million to 2.4 million over those 3 fiscal years. At the recommended base rate increase of 4.75, the trend is decreasing, but at a much lower rate of about 400,000 over the 2 years, so fairly low. The days cash on hand shows similar results at 5, 6, and 7%. The trend shows significantly lower days cash on hand, and it's relatively stable, again, at that 4.75 recommended base rating.
So I understand you can't calculate a million things on the spot.
Correct.
But having said that, what if, for example, we did an electric increase of 4.5% in year 1, 4 3/4 in year 2, and 5 in year 3? I mean, that's going to make the average the same thing. There's going to be a difference in cash flow, admittedly, but I don't think we're talking about major things. And we're also talking about people having wage increases over those 3 years that are the bill.
But if we captured more early, Bob, then we would get the full rate or more. Because if you take less to start, then you're gonna have larger increases to make the same amount over the 3 years.
And that's
Typically, when it's a rate track, and that's what you would do, you would load it up heavily in the first year, and then
And that was my premise, 25 basis points less in the first year, same in the second year, 25 higher in the third year. People are going to have inflationary wage increases. As it obviously, time impact is different on money. There's going to be some minor decrease, but I mean, I'm not sure we're going to go out of business.
So one of the major points behind this process is the cost of service design, the cost of service study and the redesign. All of this calculation is all based in all of the generally accepted principles associated with that and industry practices. If we want to make a change of such a nature, we have to basically go back to the beginning of that process and go through and look at all of the assumptions that were made in that process to get to where we are today. But I'm not saying that it's impossible. I'm just saying that based on where we are right now, there would be a process we would have to go through to get to that.
Laura, is the PPA and the PGA only applicable to commodity costs, or can they be raised and lowered to affect cash on hand?
So they would not be applicable to operating and maintenance. So operations costs are operations dollars. That's base rate outside of the dollars that are embedded in base rate for energy. PPA and PGA are specifically for that volatility in energy. So it's 2 separate buckets of dollars. We track all of that. We track how that performs. We do our monthly analysis on energy and our energy recovery.
So if we have a substation transformer failure, and we have millions in PPA, you can't use PPA to pay for the transformer. But if we have a big increase due to wholesale markets going up, we can use it.
I understand. Do we have internal money that we use to do rate stabilization for the PPA and the PGA?
I'm not sure what you mean by internal money.
As opposed to the rate stabilization fund or the municipal trust fund at CEMA?
So NPU has the dollars that we collect for both the PGA
Yes.
and the PPA. We
Yeah.
use those dollars in regards to managing of the volatility of the energy. Those dollars recover all the costs of, and as those costs ebb and flow, our PPA and PGA ebb and flow.
That's well covered, presentation on PPA, PGA, and he can show you where the dollars are in the graphs.
All I'm saying is I don't want to double count. If, because we have money at CMAQ in a rate stabilization fund.
Mhm.
And we also, in theory, while it's under debate, have money in the municipal trust fund at CMAQ. With stabilization. But as I understand it, we also have some money at NPU for rate stabilization as well. And so I guess I'm trying to understand how much do we have potentially for rate stabilization at NPU? What is the potential materiality of that money? Because PPAs and PGAs can vacillate significantly. And we have lots of customers. I don't know if $1 million is one day's stabilization or 1 year's stabilization.
So Brenton is going to go through that in detail in the next presentation. So if you missed anything that you're looking for, please feel free to ask. But I think he's got everything covered that you're looking for.
Okay.
Okay, so did we finish this slide? Okay, so on to the next slide. So looking at the average monthly residential customer, the bill impacts there at the recommended base rate increase of 4.75. The average residential customer bill would increase by $3.02, and it's 14 cents less at the 4.5%. So we would request that the board approve the rate at the 4.75% recommended rate increase. This is done with the 8% rate of return. Again, this is recommended based on the age of the system and the required capital investment. It is less likely for us to receive a major division. And electric requires a significant number of upgrades in order to maintain our reliability and manage load growth as we move forward. The 4.75% recommended rate increase meets our cash and debt service coverage in year one, provides stable cash balances over the 3-year rate track, meets our rate of return on year 3, and it's a rate increase commensurate with inflation. So before we move into the next division, are there any further questions?
Lauren, this is Bill Wazika. You're cutting out a little bit. So will that increase will be that $3 and whatever cents a month for 3 years?
So that would be the first year increase. It would be slightly different as we move forward for the next couple of years.
Would it be ballpark?
Ballpark, yes.
Okay.
It's
Thank you.
yeah.
Right, and when you look at the age of infrastructure, you know, our newest substation was built in 95 roughly. And that was an upgrade of an existing substation, and the oldest is 80 years old. So we really have done a lot of major infrastructure improvements in the electric system. So that's why we're looking through 5 projects and other projects, the North Main project, to upgrade and get a system a little more younger and more current.
Again, same format on the slide. The first column in the first table is the base rate increases. The second is the applied rate of return. The next 3 columns are the fiscal year 24, 25, and 26 forecasted results. The bottom line of the table is our target. And the operating income variance on that second table is the variance between the performance and the total. Looking at the table, fiscal year 24 and 25 results are all highlighted in red, showing that the forecasted income targets are not met in that first 2 fiscal years. At the recommended rate increase of 8.32%, the forecasted income in fiscal year 26 is $2,748,234. which is higher than the target of 2,683,366. And if we look at that second table, we can see that our forecast exceeds our target by a little over $64,000. And at the requested 0.25% reduction to the recommended base rate, the target is not met through the fiscal 26. And by applying that level increase to all 3 years, this is a gradual way for us to meet the target over the rate track period. And looking at debt service coverage, the table is the same format as the prior page. The target is the 1.7, and the target is met in fiscal year 25 and 26 at the recommended 8.32% base rate increase. Again, looking at the operating cash and days cash on hand, the format being the same as the prior tables with our minimum target and our days cash on hand range of 180 to 240 days for that AA rating. Looking at the first table, the fiscal year 24 results, the recommended base rate increase of 8.32% meets the operating target in all 3 years. And the second table for the days cash on hand shows similar results. And NPU would evaluate the use of the cash balances for additional investment in infrastructure outside of debt, such as the drinking water state revolving fund, as future debt financing for projects is not guaranteed. Next slide, please. Looking at the average monthly residential customer bill impact at the recommended base rate increase of 8%, residential customer bill would increase by $3.34 a month, and it's 10 cents less at the 8.07. Slide. So we would request that the board approve the rates at the recommended 8.32% increase. In the water division, the 5% rate of return is recommended based on our generally accepted cost of service study principles and industry standards. A significant amount of infrastructure work has recently been completed. The recommended increase meets the cash target in year 1 of the rate track and meets the debt service coverage in year 2, provides a stable cash balance over the 3 years, meets our return on rate based by the year 3 of the track, and moves the components closer to the cost of service. And in the rate increase here, there is a different percentage applied to the customer charge versus the volumetric charge, but bringing those two together brings us closer to cost of service.
So we did not increase the water bill for
The last 3 years.
the last 3
Yep.
years.
Mhm.
I mean, my reaction, I was here for that. I mean,
Mhm.
I guess I need to pay better attention to it. My reaction to that is, gee, that's probably not a good overall strategy because you could have made a moderate increase for 3 years, each of those 3 years. And then the increase wouldn't have to be as big this time. And, you know, people tend to look at the future rather than the past. And
Mhm.
nobody's going to say, gee, you know, those guys at NP were great. They didn't bill us for 3 years, give us increases for 3 years in water. They're going to say, oh, 8%, holy cow. I mean, I just strategically, I mean, it just seems to me that a more even track would make sense in the future.
That's what we're trying to go about.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Discussion.
Absolutely. Okay.
And 5% here, DAP project, deep river filter, the aqua tank narration. So a lot of major projects have happened and got completed in the last 3 years.
Yeah.
Any other questions in the water division before we move into sewer? Okay. So the following slides are focused on the sewer division. And again, same formatting going across the table from left to right. We have the base rate increases in the first column, the rate of return in the second column, and the forecasted results for fiscal year 24, 25, and 26 in the third column. And the operating income table working with the variance table in the first table is the targets, and the second table is our variance to the targets. Unlike the last 3 divisions, we are looking at a rate increase in the sewer division as opposed to a rate track with multiple year increases. So while we are looking at that rate increase, we did make the assumption that that same rate increase would be applied to all 3 years, even though that's not actually in the request for the improved rates. So the first two tables showing the results for fiscal year 24 show that we're not meeting our target. And if we think back to our original presentation, our first recommended increase was 17%. However, when looking at the forecast over a longer period, we looked at it over 8 years. We've only included 3 here, but over that 8-year period, we were able to lower the rate to increase the recovery over a longer period of time. The longer recovery period, coupled with the significant number of variables that are associated with the wastewater treatment plant, are the reasons that we're recommending that 12.1% rate increase rather than that 17% that was originally recommended with the cost of service study presentation in June.
So it's going to be an 8-year increase at that rate, which is 150% over a year.
Which was 17% at 5 years. So the significance of the wastewater treatment plant is huge based on the assumptions we have. That being said, there's a lot of variables that are part of that, which is why we're looking at a rate change that 1 year as opposed to proposing a multi-year track. Those variables can significantly impact what the forecast is looking like.
And I don't think everybody understands this out in the public, but unlike gas and electric and water, we don't have a 10% pilot payment on sewer.
Correct.
So that's not an added expense.
Correct.
Yeah, and, big reason for 1 year. This year, we just got approved by the city council last Monday. We plan on signing the contract on Friday this week. That's the contract deadline to get it signed with Dickerson. Then we're planning on having a kickoff mid-October, or October 19th for the project. But they're going to be seeing the same supply chain issues that we're having, and we don't know how fast they can move, proceed, and get things started. Concrete and digging is easy, but ordering some of the key components of this project may take a while. So things may be delayed. We don't want to charge too much too soon. And this project we're saying is going to be 4 to 5 years, or 3 to 5 years, could be easily 5 to 6 years for. So let's make sure we're doing things appropriately, reevaluating every year. We're gonna have to close on the loans every year as well.
So next slide. So we're looking at debt service coverage. Again, same formatting with the table and our target at that 1.7. The target is met in fiscal year 24 with that 12.1% base rate increase. And next slide.
And just so that I make sure I understand on the sewer, the amount that we don't have to, we don't pay out of grants or out of, that we don't pay out of grants is financed by the state at 2%.
Correct.
So that effectively we're paying it back with cheaper dollars than 2%, at least now not even keeping pace with inflation.
So looking at operating cash and days cash on hand, the target for operating cash is that minimum, and the days cash on hand range is that 180 to 240 for that AA rating. The fiscal 24 results show that at the recommended 12.1%, we're meeting the target, and then at the days cash on hand, we see similar results. Again, looking at the assumption that that base rate increase is applied to all 3 years, but again, we are only recommending a rate increase for this November and reevaluating as we move forward.
Laura, why is the cash on hand in 26 so much higher than the target?
The recovery of those costs upfront as we move forward into that wastewater treatment plant, we are going to see significant amounts of debt service coming on. So we're knowing that we have over this 5 to year or so construction window, we're going to have all of those loans closing each year. And each year, we're gonna have to start paying on that debt. That won't happen, that is, again, forecasted right now, based on what we're looking at. And we'll also be recovering that cost for that plant over that same window in time. We won't need to replace that plant until a future time, but we do also have other significant capital investments in that division. So as we move forward, all of those components, our days cash on hand, our rate of return, everything will be evaluated that periodically because of all those variables. We want to make sure that we're looking at that on a regular basis and making those right decisions for forecasts and moving forward.
So you got costs coming forward that you can't quite nail down, or you're not accounting for it.
All of that debt is going to be significant. And we're going to be closing on that every year and having to start repaying that debt every year. And there'll be periods where that debt will be significant. At 200 million, it's going to be a challenge.
So saying that it's not reflected in that number right now.
So a portion of it is, but as you go forward and you keep adding another 10, 20, 30, 40, $50 million in debt and all of those debt repayment. We do also see that cost recovery over that window of time, we need to manage that in regards to where we are with that period, with that process.
All right, so we're only looking at 1 year for the wastewater. Right?
Yes, a rate change, not a rate change with a track.
There's also very strong potential of getting additional grant money for this project. And we're working with our local legislators and the governor's office to see if we can get additional funding. So that would also reflect year 2, 3, 4, if we were to get more funding.
Those variables change that forecast and that analysis significantly, absolutely. So if we go to the next slide. So the average monthly residential customer bill impact at that 12.1% is $8.51. 17 cents less at the 11.85. What? So we would request that the board approve the recommended rate increase at that 12.1%, using that 5% rate of return recommended by generally accepted cost of service study principles and industry standards. As Chris mentioned, we are actively pursuing additional grant opportunities to offset that significant cost of the wastewater treatment plant. The 12% meets our cash and debt service coverage, brings our rate components closer to the cost of service. And again, the recommendation is a decrease from the original 17% proposed to now the 12.1%, extending that recovery period over a longer time. But as mentioned, future rate increases of a similar magnitude are planned over the next several years. And as we get more information on variables associated with the wastewater treatment plant, we'll be able to move forward with that analysis and recommendation.
At last month's meeting, we were talking about lowering the PPA and the PGA going along with the rate increase. So that those two, at least for the first year, would be a reduction in the bills. But that's not what I saw here. Is that?
So this is base rate only. Brenton's presentation. Yeah, nope. But they are components, and it is complex because they do work together. So
Rates, energy,
talk about
the all both to get to the bill.
next slide. So, in summary, the proposed measure with inflation, they reflect a balance of responsible operations and maintenance, capital investment, debt management, meeting our key financial performance indicators. As Brenton's going to go over, it's forecasted that the PGA and the PPA can be reduced materially, coincident with this base rate increase, and that will alleviate the impact to customers' bills. And we will remain competitive with the IOUs and regional utilities with these rate changes. So any questions on the base rate side?
Base rate.
Base rate.
Good, that's good.
Sure.
No, so, all right, so to answer my original question, the rate of return, all the rates of return are above what the rate increases. So essentially, we're looking at adding money every year to the divisions, essentially.
So
Right, is that my understanding of rate of return we're expecting to get? If a 5% rate of return means that we'd be adding 5% cash to the division every year, essentially. That the way you understand it?
Now, the rate of return,
you've confused me.
5%, like plant and service, like, let's say that you have $100 million worth of plant and service. You can earn 5% on that every year. So then you would roll that back into your revenues. It may be a 10% increase in revenues or a 2% rate increase in revenues, depending on what your revenue level is. But the rate of return is based on the value of your plan
Where is our return coming from? Customers.
in a rate increase.
So that,
So rather than investing the money, getting an 8% rate of return, you're saying from the rate increase, I'm expecting an 8% increase to the division, is that
Yeah, but we invested in infrastructure
right?
and we're allowed to get a return on that.
And then we reinvest that in infrastructure.
yeah, and then we
Right.
invested in.
And then we reinvest that back into more infrastructure.
There's no commissioner bonus on it. Yeah, there's no constraint.
Well, I shouldn't be, okay, all right.
So
So that
it just
makes
gets
sense.
reinvested right back into the business. And if we don't spend it, cash goes up, but the plan is to reinvest in our infrastructure.
That's why they have minimum statutory minimums to make you earn that, to reinvest in the system. They don't want towns owning these systems and not put any money into them, then people don't have electricity. So it's sort of like a requirement.
So the 5 to 8 is actually stipulated by
Yeah,
state.
by state statute.
Very well, thank you.
Okay, all right. I will turn it over to Brendan to go over the wholesale energy portion.
There.
Yes. No.
Alright, good evening, everyone. So there were some questions raised about wholesale energy, cost volatility or rates, how we try to stabilize rates amidst this, volatile wholesale energy markets. So we put together a presentation to review some history surrounding volatile wholesale energy costs that impact NPU. This dynamic is not anything that is new. It's been around for a very long time. It's also something that we project to continue to see in the future. But in this presentation, we're going to review how we successfully meet those market challenges with procurement strategies, recurring analysis, and some internal tools. Also, feel free to please interject if you have any questions at any time. I will gladly do my best to answer any questions you may have during this presentation. So next slide, please.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So energy price volatility. So in New England, the price of natural gas has a very large impact on electric generation costs. Last year in 2022, ISO New England reported that nearly 50% of all electric generation use natural gas as a fuel. This reliance significantly increases price volatility of both electric energy as well as natural gas. In the winter, the New England interstate pipelines rely on the introduction of an LNG in order to meet the demand. This puts some additional upward pricing pressure in New England on natural gas costs because New England has to compete globally for LNG supplies. It can't be sourced domestically. It has to be shipped in from Europe, Asia, the Middle East, areas such as that. And we're competing with the European market, the Asian market to attract those cargoes. Pipelines in New England also, they operate at full capacity during the winter, and they even operate near full capacity even during the summertime at this point. And growth opportunities, as we know, new pipeline infrastructure is very limited. Some would maybe even argue relatively non-existent in the Northeast. It's very difficult to put a new pipeline into the ground, new interstate pipeline currently. Let me see, just really want to point out that the electric markets and the gas markets are more interrelated than ever. Back in maybe 15, 20 years ago, natural gas generation in New England made up 15% of the portfolio, where diesel and coal were about 40, but fast forward 15 years later, now you're talking natural gas generation is 50%, right? And think about how the peaks are starting to change now too, the use of electricity, all the electric heating that is starting to go in as well. That's when natural gas is at an extreme premium. But now you're seeing loads start to pick up on the electric side as well in the winter. So it is it is a very interesting dynamic, but these markets are very interrelated. So next slide, please. So this is the historical NYMEX Henry Hub gas cost going all the way back to 97. Just some of the key takeaways you just want to show is just the volatility, the constant ebbs and flows over time have always been there. And we also project them to be there. The dotted line is the current forward projections, and you'll notice those winter peaks of pricing when natural gas at a premium. You know, like we said, it's always existed. We feel like it's going to always continue to exist. You know, we'll briefly go into some details about some of the events that caused some of these peaks over the history. Also, we're going to review just how we've successfully operated during these times when there's been extreme volatility in wholesale energy prices. Next slide. So very similar to the last graph, however, this is on the electric side. So this is actually delivered CMEC cost to NPU. You know, this goes all the way back, I believe, to the early 2000s, 2002. You can see just constant ebbs and flows, ebbs and flows, ebbs and flows. I mean, obviously, there were some significant events that occurred last year that we had talked about. I mean, I think just last year, maybe short there, probably maybe had 6 to 8 presentations that we had developed for the board surrounding wholesale market costs, energy costs, projections, and projections of the PPA and PGA. So, and then also the dotted line would be the forward look, and just those peaks and valleys, you know, are also projected to continue. So,
And can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
The staff, and I think you guys started this analysis a few months ago. And
Which analysis? Sorry, I don't mean
the whole rate review.
Oh, yeah, understood.
Yeah, and we received the first presentation at the end of June from your firm. And I think it's your firm. That's not crazy. The consultants. But since June, the price of West Texas crude oil, for example, has gone up close to 30%.
Sure.
It's, you know, today's Wall Street Journal, oil's run to $100. Yes, Fed.
Yeah.
New York State has restricted the ability to do new pipelines to bring gas into New England, basically. Well, not to keep bringing it into New England, to build pipelines, period, but that's how we get our gas. I guess the question is, when we look at the PPA and PGA estimates that we have in the material we're reviewing, is it outdated or is it not outdated?
Oh, no, I mean, I'll go into how we update that, but we look at this analysis every single month.
Okay.
We get up-to-date forward projections of cost on the electric side from CMEC once a month. I get them on the gas side from our asset manager twice a week.
Yeah.
So we're actually getting a real live look at those forward markets. You know, not to mention too, the areas to which we procure natural gas are very different from Texas. You know, I mean, that is one of the options, right? That we can get some gas from the Gulf. To be honest, we purchase the majority of our gas year round from the mid-continent, Pennsylvania, Ohio area, the Appalachian Shale sort of stuff, right? And we also have the ability to procure gas all along that path from the Appalachian Shale to our city gate, or from the Gulf of Mexico all the way to our city gate, right? There's other various liquid points in between. So we do have a wide range of areas that we can procure from based on our pipeline, you know, entitlements and pipeline capacity. It will get into the procurement strategies, but we ensure that we are buying the cheapest gas every single day that our contracts allow us to.
Well, I don't question that. I guess my question is, we had assumptions for what the PPA and the PGA would be.
In the cost of service?
Yes, relative to the rate increases, and what the net effect would be on customers.
Yeah.
And I guess what I'm asking is, A, is that data still accurate and is it still the case, or is it higher or lower? And B, is there a change coming sooner than later?
The forecast, so in regards to the cost of service study, all energy revenues and energy costs net to zero, right? So there's no operating income in the cost of service being generated from energy costs, right? Energy is strictly a pass, just speaking from the cost of service.
I understand that.
But when we did present the all-in rates, which included the PGA change, the PPA change, they are very similar to what we are currently seeing. Well, the analysis that we're providing, the figures I'm providing are going to be updated through July 31st, 2023, which I did mid-August. But everything is still holding true. If there is movement, it's relatively minimal compared to what we had presented in June, still relatively consistent with what we have today. The forecasts are a moving target, right? We get updated data, the numbers are going to change, the projected PPA, PGA are going to change as well. We're just trying to draw a line in the sand to say, hey, this analysis is good as of this time. Let's implement the rate and let's monitor, right, and move forward and make adjustments if necessary in the future.
But we're being asked to make a decision on the internal rates, which we control.
That's right.
And PPA and PGA rates that we don't control, with the expectation that it's going to be a net savings for our customers.
So Bob, when you look at that graph,
Yeah,
dark heavy line is history and the dotted line is the future market.
yeah,
So you can see there's not predictable, large increases for natural gas.
okay.
Or this, that, electric. If you go back one, it's the same. Those lines there and dots at the end are the future market. That's what the markets are projecting.
That first spike was in 2001, gas went $2 a decatherm to $8 in one winter. And it was nonstop through 2009 when they discovered Marcellus Shale. So we have a history of managing exactly what you're talking about. High prices, volatile prices, spikes, low demand, high demand, that's what we do.
I own like 1,000 shares of Enbridge, so I don't mind if it goes up for a second. But in my commissioner responsibility, I just want to make sure that our data was up to date and what the sort of projections are.
I think by the time Brenton's done with his whole presentation, you'll see sort of how we do it. And if not, you'll get to ask the questions of Brenton.
It is 100% up to date, but these are forecasts. A lot of things can change over time, and just think of like things that happened a year ago, 18 months ago, the conflicts, supply shortages, the shortage of gas, the reliance of electric generation on natural gas, right? There's a lot of things that you can't predict. You know what I mean? But regardless, we're just going to show kind of how we navigate through those things that we can't predict. We have the numbers, we keep them current, we update them, right? There's can always be events that can throw these things through a loop, whether it be up, whether it be down, right? And we'll just continue to manage through that with these strategies. So, next slide, please. Next one. So this is, some talking points about the natural gas market history. So we saw those constant ebbs and flows on the Henry Hub and the NYMEX costs, going all the way back to 97. Gas prices were somewhat stable during the 90s, but everything sort of changed in about 2001. There were extremely low levels of storage, colder than normal, winter weather, really was exacerbated by over-the-counter derivative markets, leading to price spikes that were 4 times greater what had been realized at the time. What we mean by over-the-counter is that up until 2001, if you were buying natural gas, you're buying everything NYMEX. If you were to actually buy gas today, there are hundreds of liquid receipt points that you can buy. Algonquin, Millennium, Texas Eastern, M2, M3, Rockies, what have you, right? Those markets started coming out around this time, and it was unregulated. So it really sent things through a loop. Also, from that 2001 to 2009 time frame is when you saw the very heavy prices of natural gas. It was a $6 market, like 6-8 years, with peaks getting up to $12 a decatherm. The whole market was short gas. We had thought at the time relatively as a country, that the answer was going to be to import LNG, right? It was how we're going to meet the demand curve, was by getting supply from overseas. But everything changed in 2009 with the development of shale gas, right? They found the shale gas, found out how to process it effectively. And since 2009, prices have been very stable. But there were two blips in time. We still did see peaks. You still see the volatility of the ebbs and flows. There was a significant peak in 2014, which was some extremely cold weather. A polar vortex had kind of come across the majority of the country. And then most recently, 2021, 2022, when we had, global LNG demand from Europe and Asia. We had very low domestic storage. Global storage was low. European storage levels were at very low levels. Demand was just so much stronger than the supply domestically. And that was also predominantly driven by electric generation. Even though prices were high, natural gas was still the cheapest fuel to generate electricity. So all those things really caused the extreme pricings that we saw in late 2021, 2022. And even since then, natural gas prices still remain relatively low, relatively stable, especially compared to oil, right? Oil is still at a premium. Next slide. So we want to take a little bit of time for the purchasing methodology, right? Like what are some of the things that we do consider, use when purchasing these commodities? And we'll speak predominantly for natural gas, as purchase power is a CMEC instrument, right? And we'll talk about that briefly. But on the natural gas side, the commodity is purchased, as we talked about, just various liquid pricing points using that least cost dispatching method, right? Based upon our capacity entitlements. What gas is cheapest on this day? How much capacity do I have left? That will come in first, followed by the next least expensive gas, so on and so forth. Right? Our contracted pipeline capacity really mitigates and insulates us from the extreme volatility of pricing that can be seen in New England for gas prices, especially in the winter. We also competitively bid an AMA, our asset manager, right? And those payments help keep our pipeline transportation costs extremely low. We're actually realizing nearly twice as much value we ever realized before in that asset management agreement. We also have storage assets where we'll inject gas during the summer into these assets. Generally speaking, gas is cheaper in the summer than in the winter. And then we utilize it in the winter, right, to help reduce our reliance on winter market gas. And then lastly, we also have the LNG plant. Very similar. It's an on-site storage, injected gas throughout the year. If there are days to where gas is going to be more expensive in the pipe than it is from the LNG plant, dispatch the LNG plant, and try to save some money. On the power side, CMEC has various strategies in place in order to deliver power costs well below the IOU market, whether it's hedging, projects, demand side management, etc. Next slide, please. So after we purchase the commodities, what is it that we do, or what are some other things that we still have available to us to help mitigate the volatility or insulate ourselves and our customers? Because we're still subject to prices constantly changing, spikes, valleys, volatility. We have internal and CMEC resources available that allow us to mitigate this impact to the customer. Internally, we have the PGA and the PPA funds, and at CMEC, we have the rate stabilization fund. These funds have adequate resources in order to weather significant wholesale energy cost volatility. It really gives us the time to be able to make adjustments to the PGA and PPA, right? Analyze, look at things, come up with, see what is a reasonable rate based upon what has happened, what we're forecasting to happen, right? And then be able to get communications out there, a communication plan. It takes time. It takes time to change rates, even PGA and PPA. It takes some time.
So do we know if the investor-owned utilities have a similar mitigation fund?
On the gas side, the gas companies change their gas adjustment every single month. They do it on a 12-month rolling average cost with an annual true-up. On the electric side, they change the generation rate twice a year based on, they'll go to RFP like in the next month or two. They'll be going on to RFP for the January through June timeframe. And then in the spring, they'll go out for RFP for the.
But we have rate stabilization money that is in the bank, if you want to call it that, for potential use to mitigate rate increases.
Yeah.
Does Eversource have a bunch of money in the CEO's mattress that they use to mitigate increases in the price of gas?
They look at it differently. They look at it as recovering the cost.
Okay,
And since you don't know your cost for a period of time, they use this 12-month rolling average for, you know. But it's always when it comes to this type of thing, it's always an over under, because by the time you buy the energy, people use the energy, you have to pay for the energy, know what it costs. You have to bill that out to customers. They're gonna pay for that energy, and then you know how much cash came in to actually cover the cost. 4 or 5 months could go by.
so I guess another way to ask the question is that if there's a spike in the price of natural gas and the price of electricity prices because of gas, is the investor utility going to go up more profoundly than we are?
They don't have any mitigation techniques, if that's what you're asking. Like because of who we are, we look out for the cost of the energy as well as the cost of the operation. Whereas an investor owned utility would not do that. They're looking at fully recovering their costs.
Right.
Now, when you look at a 12-month rolling average, does it sort of mitigate that price spike? Yeah, but you're still gonna see it.
Yeah, it depends on how long the price spike is.
Exactly.
And you look at the electric side, and it's twice a year, so they can be way off on that.
Yeah, that's why they
Way
went
over recover, way under recover.
36 cents a kilowatt hour this past winter. You know, and now they're at 26, so they have huge variations there.
So, as we discussed, right, the PGA and the PPA funds, right, allow us to, navigate the costs or navigate the volatility, give us time, right, or make adjustments to the PGA and the PPA or rates. These adjustments can be up or down, right? We can increase PGA, PPA, we can decrease the PBA, PGA, all in response to the market conditions. And looking forward, or even historically, what's the performance of the funds been? Has there been that over/under collection that we talked about? But at the end of the day, actual energy costs are still 100% recovered from the customers. It is strictly a pass-through. It's just over time, right, that these are collected. We try to spread out this collection over as long of a time as possible and keep the rate as stable as possible over that time. Next slide, please. So getting into the mechanism of the PGA fund itself, right? The PGA fund, it's used to stabilize recovery of volatile wholesale energy market costs over time, right? It gives us the ability to have less frequent, smaller adjustments to the purchase gas adjustment or PGA, resulting in more stable and predictable bills for our customers. The overall goals that we have when looking at these funds is we want to balance the timely recovery of the costs. We want to maintain appropriate reserve balances in order to weather the large swings of volatility that can happen. And we want to keep the PGA as stable as possible, as long as possible. The PGA fund itself is funded through a portion of base rates as well as the PGA. So those two pieces together account for our total purchase gas cost recovery. The funding requirement or our target fund balance is 180 days cash on hand, very consistent with our other operating cash flows. This minimum target in fiscal 24 is $2.9 million. The balance in the PGA fund as of the end of July 23 was $4.6 million. Next slide. So in regards to the PPA, I won't go into the mechanics of it. It works exactly the same way as the PGA. It's just on the electric side, right? Recovering wholesale market costs, giving us time to make less frequent, smaller adjustments, stable, predictable bills for the customers. One thing that's important to note is the PPA fund is used in conjunction with the rate stabilization fund. We talk about 180 days cash on hand. When we're talking about electric wholesale energy, our target is 90 days cash on hand in the PPA and another 90 days in the rate stabilization fund. Those pieces together will make up to our total 180-day target that is very consistent. Let me see. So the PPA, once again, same thing as PGA, funded a portion through base rates, and the remainder is funded through the PPA charge on customers' bills. The 90-day
target in fiscal '24 was $8.1 million, and the fund balance as of the end of July was just over $6.7 million. Next slide, please. So just getting to that other point, the rate stabilization fund works. Think of it as just like a PPA, where the PPA works between NPU and the customers. We view the rate stabilization fund as being a PPA between us and CMEC, right? It is used to try to stabilize volatile wholesale energy costs, right? To minimize the impact to us and therefore in turn our customers. The rate stabilization fund is funded through margin from CMEC generation projects, as well as the annual equity distribution from CMEC, and any necessary transfers from municipal trust. The funding requirement, like we talked about, is identical to the PPA, right? That additional 90 days cash on hand, or that second half of the 180, another 90 days. So the target's $8.1 million, and the balance as of July 31st was just over $7.8 million.
Chris, I could be wrong, but I thought you said it was 9. Is that?
That's right.
This was as of
July.
August 31st. It could be higher, could be low. I don't know the current balance.
Yeah, if I looked at the current bill, I can give you the exact.
As of August 31st, 7.9 change, 7.92.
Yeah, okay.
I guess, right?
So we have roughly 14 between the CMEC and the internal, we have roughly $14 million.
Target of 16.2. I think purchase power costs are projected around 33 million.
But also to be prudent, if rates go up a lot in 1 quarter or in 1 year, we can't dump all the money in there because then we have nothing left to
Correct.
work with.
Again, a balance, long term.
Yeah.
So we talked about the funds. What's the methodology that we have behind the PGA and the PPA? We look at this analysis every single month, update it every single month, update balances in the funds, update forward projections, update current actual collections as well. The analysis includes, cumulative past, over, or under collection in these funds. These funds have been monitored this way for years and years and years. Like we talked about, we receive 5 years of up-to-date forwards, either on a monthly basis from CMEC for electric costs, or on the gas side, getting twice a week from our asset manager. Those are both rolled into the PPA every month, rolled into the PGA every month. We do have some goals, when we're looking at making some proposed adjustments for the PGA and the PPA. We talked about having rates as stable as possible for as long as possible. So we work with this 12 to 24-month recovery of past and forecasted energy costs, trying to keep the rate stable for 12 to 24 months, right? This ensures that stability and predictability to customers, and also minimizes the impact. Those ebbs and flows in those 12 to 24 months are going to be extreme, right? But we're trying to have the customer see this. All right. Another goal is that we want to maintain fund balances during this recovery window, right? Have enough of those funds on deck to account for the ebbs and flows of costs. They are going to vary dramatically over time, and we'll see graphs in a moment. And we track this every single month, make further adjustments if necessary. If things seem like they are heading down an escalating direction or decreasing direction, right? Those things are brought up and analyzed and take it back and say, well, do we have to make an adjustment sooner than what we had anticipated? Next slide, please. So the BGA itself, we'll talk about why we're, putting forth what we're putting forth today versus what we were seeing a year ago when we last set the rate, right? So purchase gas costs have decreased substantially in the summer of 22. We executed a new AMA that is returning $6.5 million a year for 2 years of annual benefit. Currently, it's $3 million. So that's a significant reduction of purchase gas costs for the next 2 years. Also, as you saw on the slide, the natural gas markets are significantly lower. A year ago, we had a very warm winter. Due to the warm winter, we had increased storage inventories both domestically and globally. Not to mention, we still have record oil and natural gas production. So the expense forecast for the combined fiscal 24 and 25 periods is now looking to be $6 million for those 2 years together. A year ago, that forecast was nearly $18 million. So that is a 67% decrease in forecasted expense just in the last year. So because of this, the PGA is currently overperforming and is projected to continue to overperform at the current rate. Therefore, we're suggesting that on November 1st, we reduce the rate to a credit of nearly 33 cents. That's dollar swing. That's a dollar reduction in the PGA. And by doing so, we would still meet our funding target of 180 days cash on hand by June 30th, 2025. Next slide, please. So this is just a graph sort of depicting that, depicting these projections. The bars represent our current PGA rate, so you can see how it, and this goes way back to 2018, you can see it ramp up over time. And then the shaded region would be kind of the forecast, right? So we're projecting a 33-cent credit starting in November. The green line would be our target balance, right? And how that has changed over time because that is a function of purchase gas expense. When purchase gas expense is going down, so does our 180-day target, right? The black line is the actual fund balance. And the red line is the Henry Hub. The Henry Hub market. So one of the first slides we showed was the history of the Henry Hub market. We've now overlaid that on top of the PGA. One of the main takeaways when looking at this graph is notice the inverse relationship between the red line and the black line. So commodity costs versus our fund balance. Generally speaking, as costs rise, our funding balance is going to decrease. Unless we have a change to the rate, right? Unless we make a change to the PGA. So correspondingly, now look at the bars versus the red line, right? As costs are increasing incrementally over time, so is our PGA rate, right? It's ramping up, meeting that peak. It's getting to a point where now things have cooled off in the market, right? The black line is now ahead of its target, currently and projected to be there, hence why we're recommending reducing the rate. Next slide. PPA is a very similar story, although not as significant of a magnitude, but power costs have decreased significantly since last year when we set the PPA. This trend in natural gas pricing, right, directly impacts electric. So looking at the expense forecast for the same 2 years, fiscal 24 and 25, we now are projecting a total purchase power cost for those 2 years of just under 63 million. A year ago, that forecast was 75 million for the same time frame. That's a 17% decrease in purchase power costs. So the PPA is projected to overperform, right, due to these forecasted cost decrease. Once again, we're recommending making an adjustment on November 1st. We will also project to meet our target of 180 days cash or 90 days cash on hand in the PPA, I should say. It's 25. Looking to drop the PPA down to about 4.3 cents a kilowatt hour, where it's currently at almost about 7.3 cents a kilowatt. All right. And this is a graph showing the exact same thing that you saw on the PGA side, except the red line now represents the billing rate. So just note the same relationships that you noted before, right? As costs go up, look at the fund balances and how they go down, and look at how extreme that fund balance went down over the last winter period. Mind you, we were utilizing rate stabilization at this time as well. Our PPA fund balances went down over $3 million in a matter of 3 months to account for the purchase power expenses. Well, and you can see how high that peak is in cost too in red, right? That just sort of goes to the importance of having appropriate fund balances on hand as to weather this extreme volatility. Instead that costs ramp up, you notice our PPA ramps up too, right? Yeah. And hopefully our funding balance.
The first is, we have, I don't know, 55% split between our internal rate stabilization funds for the PBA and the CMAQ rate stabilization funds. If rates go up, do we have a preference as to where we take the money out of first? And I don't know. I mean, that's
There's two different things. The one thing about the CMAQ rate stabilization fund is we could send them a memo tomorrow and have it changed for our next bill. So if we have some significant spikes like we have here, we could have them increase the withdrawal from the fund.
okay.
With a PPA, PGA, you want to have communication with customers, you want to explain it. It takes probably a few months to get there. And if you're going from like a winter, especially in the PGA, going from a winter into a spring, summer, you're not going to recover those costs until the next
I'm
winter.
sorry, I wasn't clear. I'm talking about the PPA, just the PPA. And we have two sources of mitigation. One is our internal money, and the other is the CMAQ money. And my question is, do we have a preference as to where we draw the money?
So the CMAQ money, Bob, we typically use for the winter months.
Yeah.
And we don't reduce it year round. We reduce it in those peak months where the highest costs are gonna be. And that's that 5-6 month period, and that's when we try to reduce
Because
it. Because then we would see more volatility.
Yeah, well, kind of because of that, because of the cash issue. And not a cash issue, but because of the significant draw on cash. I mean, this past winter, in 3 months, you saw purchase power bills of 4.5 million, $4 million, and $5 million in 3 months, right? Where on average throughout the year, maybe it's 3 or less, right? So we had significant draw on cash to pay those bills. And that's even with buying down those peaks at, I think we'll get to it in a second, but I think we're buying them down about $10 a megawatt hour. Right, so I think, to Steve's point, I think, the quickest and best thing, or the quickest thing we can do is act on the rate stabilization fund while still meeting targets, right, managing it effectively. It's a lot easier, a lot smoother. There's a lot less involved with that, and it's not necessarily directly impacting customers.
and I suppose this is more of a CMAQ question, but is the volatility of the PPA less from CMAQ because of their hydro project in Vermont, for example, and some other non-gas related generation?
Yeah. So projects are cutting down on transmission costs, projects are cutting down on peak costs.
Yeah, so like the Vermont hydro, I think at one point was only a little bit more expensive than gas. It's not gonna change.
But they also have a peaking component.
Yes, that's right. Yes, that's right.
So there's a base rate and there's a peaking.
Thank you.
Next slide. So this is just showing some history of our residential PGA and PPA going all the way back to 2005. So once again, if you were to put this on a line graph, it's going to look very similar to the market prices that we had shown in the graphs before, except they plateaued for a significant amount of time, where the energy costs are constantly changing. Our PGA has been as high as $1.20 in 2005 and in 2008. It's also been as low as a 4-cent credit back in 2015. We are projecting and proposing to have the lowest PGA we've had in the last 20 years and potentially ever, starting on November 1st. There have been periods where we've gone as long as 2 years, maybe a little bit more, without adjusting the PGA. And then there have been times, and that's when markets are stable. But then there's also been times where the markets make sure volatile, and we've changed it up to 3 times in a year. And that was like most recently the last year. Same thing from the PPA. It's been as low as roughly 2 cents a kilowatt hour back in 2005. It's been as high as 7 cents a kilowatt hour, like it is currently, and similarly so back in 2011. Very, very similar story here. There have been periods where we didn't touch the PPA for 4 years because it was appropriate. Recovering costs and the market was stable. And then there's been times where we had to do it 3 times a year. Next slide.
So, you know, taking this into the rate stabilization methodology itself, we talked about PJ, we talked about, talking about the rate stabilization fund. You know, we're currently utilizing these funds in the winter to try to mitigate those high winter purchase power costs, which, you know, were extreme last year. You know, excess equity payments flow directly into the rate stabilization fund. This is, you know, one of the main deposits that helps us reduce power costs on an annual basis to our customers. Very similar to the PJ&PP, we're trying to maintain minimum balances to the target, 90-day target of electric costs. You know, and as we had discussed a little bit, the rate stabilization fund works directly in conjunction with the PPA. Either one of the analyses is done without the other. One will feed. Next slide. So the projection of this fund, you know, because of the cost decrease that we talked about over the last year, this gives us the ability to increase the rate or increase the use of the rate stabilization fund compared to what we had projected a year ago, and still maintain that 90-day cash on hand target of $8.1 million. We plan to use it in the same way, buying down those peak winter prices from December to March, that 4-month period. This past winter, we were utilizing the rate stabilization fund to the tune of a little over $10 per megawatt hour. This upcoming winter, we're forecasting to use a little over $13 per megawatt hour. And then next winter, we project to be able to use $14 per megawatt hour to buy. Next slide. So this graph is a little small, a little busy, but this is the rate stabilization fund itself. The yellows in blue are all the deposits that go into the fund. Everything in orange are withdrawals using the funds. Let's find out to use or withdrawals. And the black line is the fund balance going all the way back to 2012. You know, some things I want to point out here is just notice the recurring large annual deposits. These are the CMEC equity distributions that, relatively speaking, come in every single year into the rate stabilization fund. There is one exception in that in April of 2014, there was a transfer of $2.7 million from the municipal trust because the fund balance in the rate stabilization fund was negative at the time. So that was during an extremely volatile energy price time. We were trying to mitigate our purchase power costs or mitigate the volatility of it and set a bill rate. And when we set a bill rate, we're saying, okay, whatever the actual bill rate is compared to the bill rate we desire, we're going to flow that difference through the rate stabilization. Right. So what had happened was the market was extremely volatile. It was actual costs were coming in significantly higher than projected. So we were drawing down on the rate stabilization fund and accelerating it. So we felt the need at that point to deposit funds from this trust because they were negative. And then you also notice for a period of 4 years, we did not utilize any rate stabilization funds to buy down purchase power because number one, the market was stable, but also number two, we had to build these fund balances back up from zero, back up to the target.
So do I assume we took more out of the municipal trust fund than other CMEC members?
Correct. It's a company by company decision.
Yeah.
And it just has to be approved by the CMEC.
It's $23 million in trust fund. Our balance is $4
million.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's way less than our ownership positions, our relative positions, whatever you want to call them.
But if you look division by or company by company,
Yeah.
Some have used that for capital projects. I think Jewett City used theirs last year to buy a truck.
Okay.
So it can be used for capital. It also can be used for rate stabilization.
Yeah.
There's also talk of using that. At one time, we were subsidizing the costs of the energy that were on the PPAs for the solar projects, using some of this money at CMEC, and that's no longer being done.
Okay.
Actually, I don't think it was this fund, it was the Reggie funds, was it not?
It was out of the energy.
Yeah. Yeah. But that could be something also to buy a higher cost power and buy down power costs.
Kind of piggyback on your point, Mr. Staley, there were inquiries about the municipal trust. This is a senior fund. We felt that it was important to show just a graphical depiction of the fund balance. And relative use of the funds going all the way back to 2012. There has only been 2 uses of municipal trust from NPU's perspective. Back in 2013, CMEC had a large debt restructuring done to where all members of CMEC utilized the municipal trust fund for those costs. And we showed it in the rate stabilization fund. You see that one $2.7 million withdrawal from municipal trust that was deposited in the rate stabilization fund in April of 2014. Since then, there has been no other use of the funds from NPU's perspective. Components. All right, so rolling this all together, especially with the presentation that was just given in regards to the base rate, what is the cash projection? Operating and energy. We also have rate stabilization fund. Going out through fiscal 26, we have updated balances for fiscal 23. One of the important takeaways, if you notice, the energy balances starting in fiscal 25 are at $10.6 million, right? That's your roughly your 2.9 and your 8.1, right? Roughly at that point. But I want to draw your attention to it because we are projected to meet the target of 25. Then in fiscal years following, our analysis is that every year we're going to continue to meet the target. So, and the same thing with the rate stabilization fund. That's why you see there not being a lot of ebb and flow amongst those funds, especially in the 25, 26 fiscal periods. Next slide. That was cash. How does this look for rate competitive? So when we look, regionally, we still project to be very competitive when you grab in the increases and the PGA and PPA changes that we're proposing to make. We project that our gas costs to be 10 to 15% lower than the regional IOU. Electric could be roughly plus or minus 30% lower than the regional IOU. Water also plus or minus 20% lower than the regional IOU. In sewer itself, due to the reasons mentioned in Laura's presentation, we're in the upper third of communities surveyed for sewer rates. However, it is important to note that some of these communities do have their sewer operations funded in part by all taxpayers, not just only sewer customers, where all sewer customers fund all of our sewer operations. Next slide, please. So that's the regional competitiveness. So what does it look like for our customers then at the end of the day? How does this impact customer bills with both the base rate increases and the PPA and PPA? So if you're a force, and this is the average electric residential or average NPU residential customer. If you are a force service, a gas, electric, water, sewer customer, we project that these rate changes save you $51 a month, or you'll see a 13% reduction in your bills compared to today. If you're a 3-service, gas, electric, water customer, we project you to save $60 a month, right? Or 18% reduction to your current bills. If you're gas and electric only, projecting you to save $63 a month, 22% reduction in your current bills. If you're electric and water only customer, you'd save about $11 a month, or a little bit under 6% of bills. Right. So the last slide, please. So in summary, energy costs are extremely volatile. NPU has historically and will continue to use current strategies, energy adjustment funds in order to smooth out the impacts. Wholesale energy market projections have changed significantly versus a year ago, providing this opportunity to reduce the PGA and PPA. I recommend making the PGA and PPA changes in conjunction with the increases to have a net positive effect on customers' bills. This is not always feasible or possible. It is now, so we feel that the timing is appropriate. We will continue to monitor, track energy costs, energy fund projections monthly, ensure the effectiveness and timeliness of the rates and the cost recovery. And we do continue to project that our rates will remain competitive with the local IOUs as well as other regional utilities.
questions? That's all the material we plan on presenting for the rates. But this question is a Laura's piece or a Brenton's piece. Now's a good time to ask.
All right, I'll ask those board members who are present. Are there any questions or comments on the material presented concerning the rate structure?
Stu, this is Bill Wazika. I don't have any.
All right, thanks, Bill.
Stu, this is a Sean event. I don't have any questions.
All right, thanks, Sean. All right, I didn't, if you had any, Bob,
I thought the presentation was terrific.
it was good. Yes, so.
I still, given we have some poor people in Norwich, I know we have a rate adjustment for, but nevertheless, I think at least in the electric area, yeah, you're 4.5, 4 3/4, and 5. It's going to be easier on people who have increases. You know, Social Security is going to go up 3.7% this year, which means they're going to have more money in their pocket to pay in their years. And I did my best on my telephone to calculate the compounded rate, and it's virtually the same thing. So I think that makes a lot more sense, but I'm not going to hold my breath.
Yeah, this is probably the only year, certainly that I've been on the board where we're going to have a base rate increase, but a net reduction in people's bills. You probably only had once in your lifetime. So before the whole price of gas skyrocketed because of the UPG war and other factors, my electric was paying about 18 cents a kilowatt hour, went up to about 22, and it's going to come back down to about 19. So I'm happy about that. And during that time, the Eversource, their rate went up to like 36 or something like that. So all the things that we do at CMAC and we do here to try to knock down the peaks, we only had to raise it 4 cents, which is 22%, but it's a whole lot less than what other people had to raise it. And it's going to come right back down to 19, so that's good. And I'm only an electric customer now, so I can't speak to the gas and the water and the wastewater, but we've talked quite a bit about the projects that we're doing with wastewater and that has to happen. We have no choice in the matter. We've done significant upgrades to the water at Stony Brook, and we've done work on tanks in town to correct problems, some of the problems we had with those. So I am of the opinion that, of course, we're we're an old mill town from a long time ago. We have a lot of old infrastructure. And it's important that we spend the money or raise the funds to be able to spend the money to fix all the things in town that are 50 years old, and some things are even older than that. I think the water main from Deep River is what that was put in the 1920s. Yes, it's 100 years old. And every once in a while it bursts and it's a big mess. So that's got to get replaced at some point, right, Chris?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Right.
It's in the 20-year plan.
There you go. So we have a lot to do and it costs money, but it's always encouraging to know that at the end of the day, our rates are competitive, almost always less than the investor-owned utilities. So that's important.
And I think during this next 3-year period, I think I don't want to see us hurt service or hurt capital needs or hurt compensation of our great employees. But I think we ought to be looking at potential ways to save money in the budget, if that's at all possible. And secondly, I think we ought to be looking at the standby line of credit again. I've read stuff about it and it makes no sense to me at all. The idea that we have to go to referendum and be a public liability is just not the deal. And Bob Buckley, who was our advocate at the Dime Bank, is going to be treasurer of the city of Norwich in 2 months. And I just think having that there makes it easier to tighten the budget a little bit without having to have any fluff in it in order to, I don't mean that to be mean, any fluff in it in order to take care of unexpected things, because you have a standby line of credit that you can have. So I think I would do those 2 things, and I would move we approve everything with my one change, which is the 4.5, 5, but 4.5, 4.75, 5% for electric.
How do you want to address that, Chris?
Okay, so, can I ask for a motion and a vote, and, we can talk about options? If anyone wants to vote on several options.
Well, that's my motion. And that's,
All right, I will entertain a motion to adjust rates as Bob suggested.
So that was, Bob, can you make sure we get that?
sure. I approve everything that we have, was presented to us, with the one exception being the electric rate, where instead of it being 4 3/4, 4 3/4, 4 3/4, we instead would do 4.5, 4 3/4, and 5. And that's essentially giving customers a little bit of a break on the front end.
You get a second.
That's
That's the motion.
Did I get a first?
That Bob just made the motion.
Yeah, that's my motion. I'm sorry, all right. All right, we have a first, do I have a second?
I'll second that, Bob, Stu. Bill Wazika.
All right, is there any discussion on the recommendation, the recommended motion? I would say that I don't agree with that. I understand what Bob's, motivation was to sort of ramp it up over time to help. But I think, overall, hearing that we're gonna be able to lower bills next year and just keeping it a constant number. So we don't have to explain it every year. Why did it go up? Well, because we decided back in 2023, we're gonna raise it 0.25% every year. I would just assume, leave it alone for 3 years, leave it at 4.75%.
I agree with you too, Stu.
Thank you, Sean. Is there any additional discussion on the motion? All right, hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed say nay. I'll say nay.
Right.
We have 2-2. What happens there?
That's not going forward, so that's defeat.
All right, the motion does not go. All right, thank you.
So I'll move we approve the rate increase.
All right, thank you, Robert. Okay, all that being, is there any additional discussion on agenda item 6, which is the rate presentation? All right, hearing none. Move on to agenda item 7, which are the votes for this evening. The first one's easy. It's going to be a vote on the 2024 board meeting schedule. I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make that motion, Stu. Bill Wazika.
William. Do I have a second? I'm going to throw it next year, Chris, because we haven't got any dates.
I think by charter, we need to meet.
I know we do, you're right. All right, can I second that?
I mean, I'll second it.
I'll second that. Is there any discussion on the,
Well, can we back up? I'm confused because I thought we were voting on the rate increase.
first item on, okay. well,
Okay, that's fine.
We are, the very first vote, as I said, is an easy one. That's just going to vote on the board meeting
Oh,
dates.
you're right.
Okay, all right. So I will second that. Is there any discussion? All right, hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed say nay. Are there any abstentions? All right, the motion carries. We have dates for next year. All right, now,
We're gonna break this up into sewer and,
yes, correct. So we have the first vote will be the 1-year sewer rate increase. I will entertain a motion.
I'll move it.
All right, thank you, Robert.
I'll second it, Stu.
Second.
First and a second, is there any discussion on these 1-year sewer rate increase?
Not for
Hearing
me.
none. Mr. Johnson?
not for me.
Got it, okay, thanks, Sean. All right, hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All
Aye.
right, all opposed say nay. Are there any abstentions? There are 4 ayes, so the motion carries. All right, very well. And now the 3-year natural gas, electric, and water rate track. I will entertain a motion.
I'll move it.
Thank you, Robert.
Second.
I got a second from Sean. Thank you. Is there any discussion? All right, hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. That was a yay.
No, I said aye.
Very well. Are there any abstentions? All right, the motion carries. So congratulations, Laura. And thank you, Brent. All right, agenda item 8, we have a rate communication plan update. That was Chris, I believe.
Yes. So we had done a bit of outreach already. There was coverage in the day about the public hearing and the rates as they were proposed, basically approved. What we will do is reach back out to the day, even though they're not covering today's festivities, to make sure that they know that they passed and provide them the same perspective. We'll do the same thing with community assistance rate, which I think is an important component of what we're doing. I suggested to Chris that he and I work on an op-ed that we can pitch to the day to get the word out a bit further. There's already been a bit of media coverage on it, an article in the day, and we did a story with Channel 30. I think getting the word out more about that would be helpful. Ruth and her team have had some people ask about it already, even though it was just being proposed before this evening. I also think that we'll take out a couple of ads to place in the local papers to give a better sense of what that offering is, and a lot of social media outreach in that regard. We'll put our summary of the newly approved rates on our website, and then do a number of social media posts and link back to it so we get the same information out on a consistent basis. We'll be able to use this information in our newsletters, both for our residential customers in January, and commercial customers in January. Regrettably, our deadline to get the most recent newsletter out was earlier in September, so it would not have worked. But I think if we do all of those things on a regular basis, Jeff has already reached out to the commercial customers and explained the unique situation with the rates going up, but cost of energy coming down. So there was a minimized impact on customers, in fact, a positive impact on customers. We've done all the things we've traditionally done, but I think given that the community assistance rate is new, we go a little further and spend a couple of bucks in advertising and then try to get an op-ed placed in the day in the next week or two.
Great.
Chris, I don't know what the ethics involved are, journalistic ethics or laws or any of those sorts of things, but I've had people who are aware of this focus on our rate increase and not focus on the bill. And I don't know if distinction creates confusion or.
I think people look at the number on their bill.
Oh, yes,
And
that's right.
we'll say to
That's
them,
right.
you're gonna be $36 less this month than you were 6 months ago.
Yeah,
They're not gonna look through the fine print.
I agree with that completely. I just think, our review of it, everybody, we focused on the fine print as we should have.
It's your job.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think we can say candidly, it was a very, very thorough, in my 9 years, the most thorough review and assessment calculations made on any of the rates. It's $110 million operation. It should be very thorough. But it's no doubt that we're doing the right thing. The numbers add up and we're doing the right thing for our customers. So I think that this is something that we shouldn't hide from at all. If there are bumps in the road, there are avenues to address them. And we are more than competitive with anybody in Preston or Ledger or Rockland or Grizzly. We've got a good story to tell.
Exactly.
I've got a little better election.
Let's go down there.
Well, I mean,
What, different demographics? Larger commercials and less,
I mean, to be fair, they pay 5% Rockland, we pay 10% the Norwich.
And this is, and the community assistance rate is another $1 million that we're going to. So we've got an awful lot of good news to share and a lot of time to do it, and a lot of ways to do it.
Yeah.
So we'll be busy over the next several weeks and this is something we'll point back to for a while.
Right. Thank you, Chris.
Hey, Chris.
Yeah.
That was Bill. Thanks, Bill. Okay.
No, I
Good.
No, go ahead. I was all set. No, I just wanted to thank Chris for that.
Thanks, Bill. All right, there's no additional questions for Chris concerning the communication plan going forward. We will move into executive session. Chris, would you like to stay behind?
Right, so Eric's gonna stay for the first two items, Jeff's gonna stay for the entirety, Chris is gonna stay for the entirety, Steve's gonna stay for the entirety, and unfortunately, because of an add-on, Larry gets to stay for the entirety. And everyone else, thank you very much for attending tonight. Okay, we got some great stuff to talk about.
This is my second soda, so.
Yeah.
That was